any moment at any given time. So please feel free. And if you want to chat, that's great. There will be several points where I have some interactive things. If you had me in class, you know I like to get to know you and I like to talk. So please feel free to chat and answer the polls and that type of thing. And we'll just get started. So I'm going to share my screen. All right. So today I was invited to speak, and when Elise recruited me, she asked me to do this, and it was an opportunity to speak with y'all and to really kind of get to share my story and for y'all to get to know me. So I decided to call this Advice for Young Professionals, not knowing exactly where you were in your career. And I wanted to do this as a story in 3 parts. So first, when I was approached, this was called Meet the Professor. And something I think that a lot of people forget is profs are normal folks too. So that's me in my living room, and that's my dog. I will forewarn you that you may hear her at some point during the night before she gets rescued from her awful kennel. No, I'm kidding. It's not awful, but she thinks it is. So that's Volka, our 6-month-old German
Sorry
Short-haired
to
Pointer.
interrupt. I don't know if it's just me, but I cannot see your screen.
Oh, crud. Okay, let me fix it. See, this is not good. Okay, you can't see my pretty dog. Okay.
There we go.
Yes, that's better.
Okay, yay. See, technologically challenged. Okay, let's try this again. So, as I was saying, this is Advice for Young Professionals, a story in 3 parts. Ah, that's me. Because profs are normal folks too. We also have technological challenges. And we have normal lives. So this is our 6-month-old German short-haired pointer. You could call her a quarantine dog because we had decided to adopt a dog again. And it came out of the fact that everyone was home. So that's Volka. And as I was saying, you might hear her before she gets rescued from her kennel. But one of the things that I think it's important to remember is as you're going through your professional career, it's important to meet people and do networking and talk to people because we're just people too. And we didn't start out fully formed, springing from the head of previous professors like Athena did from Zeus. We're just normal folks and we have common interests with you. We come from the same places that you come from. And we are normal people. So in order to tell you a little bit more about myself so that you can meet me, I did a little bit about who am I? And I like to do it in a fun way. So I'm a scientist, but y'all probably already knew that. I'm also a mother. I'm a voter. I think that's a very important thing for me personally. I'm a writer. I mostly write about science, but I like to write about science for the general public. So I participate in writing for a blog for people to understand what physiology is. I'm a traveler. When I moved to Ohio, I will have lived in 8 states and 2 countries, but I love to see the world. And my goal is always to fill up my passport before it expires. I'm a daughter. A semi-extrovert. I need some quiet time, but I really like to be around people. A community member, and I think it's important to establish community in a lot of different ways. It can be at work, it can be at home, it can be as a volunteer in a lot of ways. It can be in the classroom. I'm an educator, but y'all knew that too. I am an adventure seeker, and I think that you can have an adventure in as simple as a way as going to the grocery store. When my daughter was little, we used to throw toilet paper down the aisles just to make each other laugh. I'm a friend, a wife, a caregiver, a nomad. Like I said, this will be my 8th state, and a city girl. If you ask my family, they will tell you that I don't do country very well. I like to be able to walk to get food or coffee. And as you can see, some of the things are growing. And that's just to emphasize that at different points in my life and at different points in your life, some portions of who you are will be emphasized and some may not. And these will change over time. And that is completely okay, totally normal. And in fact, probably better than normal. So the other thing that was asked of me, or presented to me, I should say, were some questions. And there was a huge list, and it was fantastic, very comprehensive. And so I picked out the three that I thought were most important. And these are the three that I want to center my three stories around. And the three questions were: what is most important piece of advice that I've ever been given throughout my career journey? What obstacles have you faced at different points in your journey and how have you overcome them? And have you always had your eye on a particular specialty, research topic, or did your direction change over time? And so those are kind of going to be the three places where I center my stories. And we're going to do this in the art of oral storytelling. And I say that because I think that communication and storytelling not only help people remember, but they're very vital to the way that we communicate with one another. They evoke feelings and memories, and it's really important for us to tell who we are and share who we are, especially as women, but also as educators, as friends, and as community members. So the first one is going to center around advice. So my first question was, what is the most important piece of advice you were ever given throughout your career journey? Perhaps you've seen the food show on the Food Network, The Best Thing I've Ever Eaten. Well, I took a little note from them. So this is the best advice I've ever heard. Ironically, as a scientist and as an educator, the best advice I've ever been given was not given by someone who was either of those things. And so the first piece of advice I was ever given that really stuck with me was by my biological mother. And she's an accountant. And she said, at most, you can do three things well, but if you add more, you will do them poorly. And that's my mom. The second piece of advice that I really carried with me and feel has really impacted my life was given by my biological dad. And he is a project manager. He happens to manage projects primarily in healthcare, but again, not a scientist and not an educator. And he said, never take a job for the money. And that's him. And the third piece of advice is not advice I was given so much as something I've learned along the way in my own journey that I would like to leave with you. And so if you take nothing else away from my discussion tonight with you, take this. Life isn't what happens at the end of the road aimed towards where you want to be, but life is what shapes the path on your journey to where you are intended to be. I hope you remember that. So the next would be obstacles. I thought this fish was just great. And I wanted to remind you that the Oxford Dictionary defines an obstacle as a thing that blocks one's path or prevents or hinders progress. Now, I have to disagree with Oxford for a moment because I think that an obstacle is simply a detour on the path leading to where you are supposed to be that stimulates growth, builds character, and illuminates the true path. So for the second story, what obstacles you have faced at different points in your journey and how you have overcome them? That was the question posed to me by the organizers tonight. Well, this reminded me of the advice that my mother gave me. You can only do three things well, but sometimes when things change, what you do is overwhelmed by the obstacles. So we have to divert our path. Well, the first thing that's always been one of the things that I want to do well is my family. And this is my family. It's me, as you can see. My daughter, Nadia, is in the middle, and my husband, Jeff, is on the far side. My daughter's comment when we took this picture was, look at the air I got. I think she just like jumping higher than her dad and I. Well, my family hasn't always looked like this. At one point, I was the child, and my family centered around me and my parents. I have more than two parents, and that's really important to me. For me, family is also the people that you choose. I have no biological siblings, but I have lots of sisters, and they are incredibly important to me. This is not always the way that my nuclear family looked, as you will learn soon. My daughter is an only child, and that's an important part of our family. But family is something that I have always tried to place a very high priority on, no matter what shape or form it took. The second thing for me that I've always tried to do well is science. Now, that may sound funny, but even when I was in school, that was important to me, whether it was as an undergraduate, a graduate student, postdoc, or now as a working professional, science is important to me. And I value my work so much that it's always had a very important and strong place in my life. So that was my second one, science. So for family and science, they've always had a high priority. In graduate school, I felt like I had time to add a third one. Now, as many of you know, graduate school takes up a lot of time. And when I was getting my PhD, I worked 7 days a week in the lab all the time. And I had a family to take care of. In this case, it was primarily my parents. And I wanted to emphasize how much I still cared about them and how important they were. And then I had my chosen family, my really good friends. But I had time for one more thing. And for me, this chosen thing was music. I love to sing. And I was fortunate enough to be part of 2 choirs while I was in graduate school. Now, because there were 2 with rehearsals and performances, it ended up taking about 10 hours a week. It was a big commitment for me, but it was so much fun, and I could not have asked for a better opportunity. We sang a wide variety of music. We sang all over the state of Missouri, and I was really, really fortunate to know that I had this opportunity. These were the 3 things that I really felt like I could prioritize. So, I'm going to ask you, to what 3 things can you fully commit yourself? Will you take a minute and reflect on this question for me? Now, maybe as you're thinking about it, we have some volunteers who would share your thoughts in the chat. Or if you don't wish to share them aloud, maybe you could share them privately for the moderators to share. And we can maybe discuss this as a group.
I don't mind to go ahead and share. Break the silence. This is definitely a hard one for me. Something I actually talked about in my med school interviews. I'm so bad with like a combination of time management and self-advocacy to say no to like leadership positions, things like that. Anytime someone needs help, I'm there. But I think like my top 3 things would be like friends/family, because I haven't made that a huge priority since living in Cleveland with quarantine. But lately that's been something that I've been spending more time on, and it's made a huge difference in my life. School right now, that has to be a priority. School / like future professional goals. And it's so hard to pick the third because my leadership positions like do take a lot of time, but I do love like music and arts and things like that. I think it's like important to have hobbies, so I'm a little torn. But so I don't know. They're going to compete for that third spot, but that's a good thing to think about.
Thank you, Elise. And I think Elise brings up an important point. We don't always have to have the same third thing. I haven't sung since I was in graduate school. I keep trying to find time, but it just hasn't been a priority other than in the shower or the car, mind you. But that's not nearly as much fun or as pretty. Anybody else that would like to share?
I could share if you guys are okay with it. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So I'm kind of in similar shoes as Elise. I think family and like school right now are definitely and have always been like really important to me. I'm also kind of on the fence as to like what the third is, like if there's an overarching topic or name for it. But I'd say for me it'd be like environment. I know that I try to do a lot like on the individual level, like I'm trying to figure out how to compost, and I'm getting into plants and, and like planting and learning more about how we can make a difference, like whether it's like voting for, politicians that are gonna make a difference like at the government level. But that's something that like does take up time in my mind, and I do try to do things like whether it's like eating more plant-based or like all these different kinds of, I guess, subjects that still fall within that. But I'd say that's like one of my passions, you could say.
Thank you, Alejandra. That's great. That's awesome. I think another thing that's important for us to remember is that if you have two things and you don't have a third, that's completely okay. But if you have a third, like Alejandra's getting into the environment and plants, and Elise is having this leadership position with AMWA, and you find that you don't have time for it right now, you can always step back. That's okay. And then you can come back to it. It's never too late, especially with the things that last forever. That's why I feel like I can always go back to music. My voice is not going to go, at least not for a few more decades. It might eventually leave me, but hopefully I got a little bit more time. But I think that's really important as we continue through our journey. And I think you'll see some of that in a minute. But these are really great things. This is important. And as we move through, we will continue to see that, right? So it's okay to not have three things, but to know that what we can fully commit ourselves to and when to say no is so important. So thank y'all for sharing. There'll be more opportunities, I promise. So as I said, in graduate school, family, science, and music were my three things. Well, shortly after graduate school, I moved and my music disappeared. I wasn't in the same place. The choirs were not available. And so I gave it up. And I had two things. Additionally, my family changed. I got married for the first time. And not too long after that, we welcomed Nadia, my daughter, into our lives. Suddenly, family took on a whole new meaning for me. And it became a much bigger portion of my life. I missed my music, but I didn't really feel like I needed it so much anymore because I had this growing presence in my life that was important to me. I was also a postdoctoral fellow, and I was trying to figure out how to balance my science with that. Not too long after that, we got a third member of our life, a third thing to do that really took over for all of us. And unfortunately, it was not invited. And it was cancer. My husband was diagnosed with cancer 6 weeks after Nadia was born. It wasn't something that any of us asked for, and it wasn't invited, but it was there. And so now, instead of three things, I had two, and shortly thereafter, I had one. Because I was taking care of our newborn daughter, and I was feeling like I needed to take care of my husband, I had to let my science go. It's the only time in my life I had ever not worked or gone to school. I let go of my postdoc. I stayed home and I cared for my family. For me, it was the only choice that I could see. I needed to take care of both of them. At that point, we didn't even really have family because the cancer overwhelmed everything. It was in every choice we made. It was in every decision, every discussion, every move. Our day centered around treatment. It centered around illness, and it centered around what the next step was. So we went from 3 to 1. And that was a really hard choice to make. And in some ways it was made for us. Unfortunately, my husband didn't make it, and he passed away a few months after his diagnosis. So in that regard, my family changed, my science was gone, and I had a lot of things to think about. But with those obstacles, we are often given change, and change can be remarkable. So I took my little daughter, and once again, we moved. And that brought with it an opportunity for me to tell you my third story and answer another question. Have you always had your eye on a particular specialty or research topic, or did your direction change over time? Well, I'd like to share with you something that I thought, and I think a lot of people think, before I answer that question for you. For most people, the career highway is often thought of as a straight line. I think that's most people's perception. You start out, you say, I'm going to be a physiologist, and this is the way it works. And the start and the finish are in a straight line. But in reality, they look a lot more like this. There's a lot of twists, a lot of turns, a lot of overlapping, backtracking. Sometimes you end up on the same road again. And finally, you get to the finish. So with this change, I did a lot of backtracking, a lot of starting over, and a lot of changes. So no, my career hasn't been always on the same track. I haven't always known what I've wanted to do. So now I ask you a question. Are you still pursuing your original career path or your original major? I invite you to answer. Are you like Anna? Yes? Or more like the minion? No. Okay, thank you very much. That's a pretty even split. So there we go. All right. I also thought Anna and the minion were pretty cute. So this leads me to the second piece of advice, the one given by my dad. Never take a job for the money when new jobs lead to new careers. So as I said, with the passing of my first husband, we left and moved to a different state, me and Nadia. And with that, I also left bench science, meaning I didn't do laboratory-based research anymore. And I started to do something that I never dreamed I would do. I became a medical educator. I'm sure that sounds funny to y'all now because that's all I do. But I never in my wildest dreams imagined that was what I would do. But with my new family structure, I couldn't fathom writing grants and living on what's called soft money with a 1.5-year-old. And I couldn't see a way around this. So I took a job teaching medical students. And I thought, okay, I kind of like this. This sounds really good. And I did it for 6 years. It was a great job. But I also wanted the opportunity to try something else. So after becoming a mom and becoming a single parent, I decided that I was going to branch out and try something that I thought I really wanted to do. So I applied for the job of executive director of a state medical society, and I got it. I also took a 40% pay cut, changed my benefits, lost my retirement plan, and some people thought I was nuts. But I remembered what my dad said, never take a job for the money. And that job opened up all these possibilities. It allowed me to pursue a very different career path. I got to use some of the skills I'd learned in my PhD, like planning and attention to detail. Only now I got to plan what was basically a big party because it was a conference. And I got to talk to people and I got to help better educate physicians. And I thought this was really cool. Well, I did that for about a year, and it opened up the opportunity for me to take a job in Washington, D.C., working for a nationally recognized scientific society. This was my dream job. This was what I had thought I had worked my whole career for. I wanted to make a difference in the lives of all these scientists like me, but I wanted to do it from a different perspective. So I took the job. And I hated it. It was awful. It was the worst thing I had ever done. And I might be a city girl, but I didn't like living in DC. It was too big. There were too many people. And I wasn't happy in my job. By that point, I was remarried. My husband and I didn't have jobs in the same place. We were commuting. He had adopted our daughter, and we couldn't be a family together. And it was just really, really tough. So once again, I took a different job. I went back to the classroom. I took a 50% pay cut, never take a job for the money. And I realized that what had been missing the whole time I had been out of the classroom was y'all. I didn't have any students. I didn't get to talk to you. I didn't get to help you see why science is amazing. I didn't get to see the light bulbs go off when you got the question right. And I didn't get to help you see why I love science and get to share this passion that I have for the way the body works. I also got to teach stuff I had never thought about teaching. I was in a biology department at a small liberal arts college teaching evolution. I never thought I'd teach that. I had so much fun. I also taught things like biodiversity. I don't know anything about frogs, but I learned. It was fantastic. And because I got to go back to the classroom, I got to restart my educational research, and it landed me a case. And now I get to be here with you tonight. So never take a job for the money. Go out on a limb, take a risk, change your path, double back. Just might end you up where you absolutely need to be. So now I have another question for you. If you find that you need, want, or are forced to change, what in the world would you do? Take a minute. Think about it. So now with these brightly colored hands, anybody want to volunteer? Share your thoughts in the chat. Are you willing to speak? What would you do?
I can go real quick. I think there are two very different paths that I would go on if I wasn't pursuing medicine. One of them is social work. And it would be dealing with a lot of the social aspects of what I'm interested in medicine, because I do want to go into primary care and help underserved communities and help fight health disparities. So I'd just be working more on the social side of that. Or I think I would want to go into education at a high school level, because I really like speaking with kids and seeing them develop and maybe helping shape the way that they grow up to, change their world and interact with other people. So I think those are the two different ways I would go.
Nice. Thanks, Inez. Anybody else?
I don't mind sharing, but mine actually goes very different route. If I had to choose, and honestly, I still kind of consider it now in conjunction with medicine, but is actually the military. It's a very important part of my family. Both my parents are served, grandparents, uncles, aunts, things like that. So I don't know, it's just always been something that sort of interested me, the honor and duty and all of that aspect. It's always been really important to my family. So something I still play with to this day.
Nice. That would be a wonderful way for you to serve. Anybody else?
I love Inez, your answer. I love that. I was a foster parent after undergrad, and social workers are just incredible. I don't think it's something I could do, but it's so needed. I think that I would also end up going into education if I just for some reason just could not go to medical school. I think that I would want to teach medical students, so maybe continue here at the program and do my PhD instead.
Okay. Awesome. So one of the things that I wanted to share, because that's basically my story in brief, and we have lots more time, were a few things that maybe you don't often think about. And these are some of the things that I try to share with my advisees So if medical school isn't your path, there are so many jobs that you can have that we often don't think about. I think we spend so much time telling young people who are intelligent, like science, and want to help people that they need to become a physician that we often forget that there are so many others. So here are a few, just in case you've never heard of some of these. I'm gonna make y'all small. Oh no, wait, I'm gonna make y'all small there. All right, so maybe there are a few of these that you've heard of. Maybe you've heard of all of them, and maybe you haven't thought about any of them. So these are just a few jobs that I think about sometimes. Optometry, pharmacy, being a perfusionist, a physician's assistant, pharmaceutical research. By the way, you can do that with the MSMP degree straight out of the program. Clinical research, you can also do that with the MSMP degree. Podiatry, being a respiratory therapist, a nuclear medicine technologist, and a radiation therapist. And I did some looking. I was curious about what the Bureau for Labor and Statistics said. Some of these have a projected 15% growth rate over the next decade. That's pretty good. And a lot of them start out making pretty good money with a lot less debt, in case that's something that you're interested in your economy. And anyway, just something to consider. So although sometimes our path varies drastically and we feel like we need a huge split, sometimes it doesn't have to. I was thinking about my path, and it's always involved science. I've always used my PhD, but you don't have to, but you can. You can also vary just a little. Okay, so now I will happily take questions. I just thought this was really funny. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can see y'all better. I